Well, welcome to the afternoon session of our first day. My name is Emily Teeter from Chicago, and we're delighted that you're here. I want to remind you to please silence your cell phones. And we're going to start with Joseph Wegner and Jennifer Hauser-Wegner from Penn Museum, Adapting a Century-Old Museum, Reinstallation of the Penn Museum's Egyptian Wing.
All right, it's really a pleasure to be here at CPEG. It's Jennifer and I's our first visit to CPEG. So wonderful to be here and great to be in Madrid. I hope you're all feeling rejuvenated after your lunch. Our goal today is to give you a bit of a look at the in-progress reinstallation project at the Penn Museum's Egyptian collection, what we call the Cox Wing, which is a long and ongoing process that we've been involved in actually for 2 decades now with various twists and turns along the way. The project is actually now in the initial construction phase for a reinstallation, which will be staggered in 2 parts. 2026 and 2028 will be the opening for the two major parts of it. So what I'm talking about today is a portion of the Penn Museum. You see a sort of an aerial view there of a part of the old building. What I'm talking about is what we call the Cox Wing, which is the section, let me see if the pointer works here. Is that visible? This section of the building here, which was part of a second phase of addition to this building. The main old building opened in 1899. Between 1911 and 1926, this section that you see here, including this large rotunda and the Egyptian wing, the Cox Wing, opened. This project to construct the Cox Wing was kind of the pet project of Eckley Brinton Cox, who was a major funder of the University of Pennsylvania's excavations in Egypt, and he had the forethought to invest in the museum as itself, as a place to house the collections that were coming in at that time. So from 1923 to 1926, they built the Cox Wing. It was intended especially to kind of highlight the large architectural pieces, sculptural components, and other sort of impressive elements to sort of wow everyone with the achievements of Egypt, of the pharaohs. So there you see a portion of the wing. It opened again in 1926, what we call the Lower Egyptian Hall, housing some of the larger architectural components that had come in at that point in time. Now, when the Egyptian wing was planned and built, it was actually intended to compose 12 different galleries. There you see one version of the plans of the original wing. You can see it projects off of what was called the Chinese Rotunda, which is a large kind of domed rotunda housing the East Asian collections. And you can see that projecting off of that, we have 2 different halls, what we fondly call Lower Egypt, which is a lower level, a large hall here, flanked by 5 smaller galleries, and then above that, Upper Egypt, the upper floor, connecting directly with the Chinese Rotunda, and again, 5 different smaller galleries off of the side of that. So 12 galleries. It was a very kind of well thought out plan to have these larger halls designated for display of large architectural and sculptural pieces, and then smaller focus galleries off of the side. One of the things that happened during this time, and I'll talk a little bit about it, is the construction of the wing involved a number of different building companies. One of them was the Raphael Guastavino company, which was involved in building a lot of these structures. We've come to know him very well during this planning and reinstallation process. He was actually a Spanish architect who came to the United States in sort of the Gilded Age and built many sort of Beaux-Arts buildings. He brought the Catalan vault style to the United States. He's well known for buildings like Grand Central Station in New York. And so his company was involved in a lot of the architectural planning of both the Chinese Rotunda there on the right, as well as the Cox Wing. So when they built the Cox Wing, it really was this kind of projecting element off of the larger rotunda, which you see there on the left-hand side. It was designed essentially as 3 different floors. There was a ground floor, which was designed to be storage for the large growing collection of Egyptian material in the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Above that, the lower floor you can see is the cutaway there is in the larger lower hall or lower Egyptian hall. That's relatively kind of modestly scaled in terms of the ceiling level, roughly 6 meter tall gallery. But then above that, this kind of soaring space with a ceiling of 18 meters. The Upper Egyptian Hall. This was specifically designed, it was intended for the display of large architectural pieces that were coming into the museum at that time through the partage. Work that had been done in Egypt beginning in 1915 through the early 1920s by Clarence Fisher. The focus of in fact, the whole kind of gallery design was creating space to house these large columns and gateways and various components of the Palace of Merintah from Memphis, from Mitrahina. There you just see some excavation images of the excavations, kind of the initial stage of that. One of the components of this large kind of sprawling palace complex of Merintah, what used to be called the South Portal that we usually talk about today is the Coronation Chapel. So these were coming back to the museum. They arrived in the early 1920s in the process of planning and building of the Cox Wing. And this led to kind of a lot of consideration for the future housing of these in the building. One of the problems was in the process of actually installing these displays, the soaring 18-meter ceiling of the Upper Egypt Gallery that you see there intended to house these pieces and really kind of allow the display and reconstruction of the columns and gateway elements from Merintah's palace at their full height. When it came to doing that, they were not quite so sure about the floor loading capacity of the upper gallery. And so they didn't want to hedge any bets on what would happen if they loaded too much on that floor. So what ended up happening is they installed the larger pieces down on the lower gallery. The upper hall, with that soaring height, was used essentially as a kind of a sculpture gallery. You can see that kind of old-fashioned display with the large extent of the floor taken up by various statues and cases housing coffins and other elements. So it was a bit of a compromise at that point. The actual original architecture of this wing, as it was intended to be used, never reached its fruition. And so since it opened in 1926, all the way to the present day, the galleries have continued to sort of evolve through time. There have been a lot of changes, kind of minor changes, special exhibits inside galleries and this kind of thing. But these large halls, the Lower Egyptian Hall that contained these disassembled architectural components of the Merintah Palace, as well as that soaring kind of height of Upper Egypt, never kind of reached their full potential. The galleries have changed in many ways over the years. One of the things that happened in the upper gallery is that it was given these very attractive, as you can tell, velvet curtains. They used to be orange for a long period of time. Then there was a change in kind of color sensibilities. They became blue, but they still created this kind of very strange backdrop for the mostly low-standing cases in the upper hall. We also had at the very back of the hall, a huge window, which used to be a planned opening for additional components of the original building that never were built. Behind that now stands the museum library and the academic wing, and so we've often had this window, which is sometimes closed with a curtain or sometimes open. The image on the upper left-hand side, I think, has the curtains open. There's been this ongoing debate about whether visitors to the museum want to peer into the library beyond to see the scholars at work or vice versa. So contending with this issue of the curtains and just the structure of this wing has been kind of an ongoing issue. Oh, thank you. Now I know who I am. So We are currently in the kind of the final stages of a very long reinstallation and reconstruction process for the Egyptian wing of the Penn Museum. It goes back actually over 2 decades. Just very briefly, back in the early 2000s, we did a pretty extensive multi-year project looking at the wing in detail, looking at the architectural aspects of the spaces. We had National Endowment for the Humanities funding to come up with a comprehensive kind of master plan to rebuild and reinstall these galleries. It then reached a point where our grand vision for the wing required support from the central administration, and roughly another decade went by before the museum administration decided that they wanted to prioritize the Egyptian galleries. They had many other projects going on over the years. So finally in 2015, the administration decided that the Egyptian wing was in dire need of attention, of reinstallation, refurbishment. And so that began what we call the Ancient Egypt and Nubia Galleries project. We've been pretty much involved in that for almost 10 years now. It's been a good portion of our lives. It's involved a lot of different people, all of the major departments within the museum, in addition to the Egyptian section, outside design firms, structural engineers, and architects looking at this wing. In that process, kind of towards the end of it, and we'll take a look at this in just a second, several kind of major kind of preparatory stages to the reinstallation and refurbishing of the wing took place. They included addition and changes to the main entrance to the museum, which is kind of contiguous with the main kind of entrance itself into the Cox wing, and also the installation of what we call the Gateway to Egypt, which is a new entrance system that links the Egyptian wing with the museum's main entrance. So both of those have taken place. And where we stand right now is we're in the construction phase. So builders are involved in currently in putting in a lot of the infrastructure and hardware to reconstruct the wing. There you see on the right-hand side, they're currently putting in new windows throughout, which is keyed to the different galleries that compose the wing. So we're slated to have a two-staged opening in 2026, which will mark the centenary of the original opening of the Cox wing. Finally, it will be refurbished and the lower galleries will be opened. And then 2 years later is our target, 2028, the opening of the upper wing. Now, one of the things that's happened is that the original 12 galleries that compose the wing have been restructured. We've had to accommodate, of course, modern kind of changes to the expectations of museum galleries. Climate control is in the process of being installed, HVAC, all the mechanicals involved in that. Also a new freight elevator, which will allow us to move a lot of the heavier components. And so we've actually created a kind of slightly reduced gallery design with 8 galleries. So the 2 larger halls flanked each by 3 smaller galleries. And this has allowed us actually to accommodate this large freight elevator system over here, which is kind of crucial to the whole enterprise. As well as over here, this Gateway to Egypt, which not only links the 3 major floors of the Cox wing, but also provides a link, as we'll see, back to the main entrance. So within that, we have these 8 galleries. The lower hall, just very briefly, and Jennifer will pick this up and talk about it further in the following presentations. We decided to kind of try and use the elevations, the different spaces and superimposed floors of this wing to come up with a sort of a simulation of kind of a microcosm of the Egyptian world. The lower halls with their lower ceilings are dedicated to daily life and funerary practices and funerary arts. So the central hall with 3 flanking galleries that we'll take a look at. And then the upper hall is dedicated to the kind of the core theme here is kingship, the world of the gods, temples, but also flanked by the 2 Nubia galleries there at 5 and 6 that we'll talk a little bit about later. So this is a cross-section through the planned reinstallation, refurbishing of this wing. The cornerstone of it has been our goal all throughout this process of finally bringing this architecture to its original intended goal of installing reconstructed architecture from the Palace of Merintah, which will compose the main part of the upper hall, and in fact using that large space, both to the verticality of it, but the large available floor space to create a sort of a simulation of some of the major architectural spaces of the Palace of Merintah. And then there you see the lower hall with that kind of darker lower ceiling that we'll focus on funerary arts. So yeah, this reinstallation project, it actually involves not just the Cox Wing, but this whole section of the museum, the Chinese Rotunda and an auditorium below it, as well as the main entrance, which you see there. So we've been working on the ground floor, which includes the storage area, the bulk of the collection, the lower floor, Lower Egyptian Hall, and then finally the upper level with the tall ceilinged hall to house the Palace of Merintah. Now, one of the things that we have dealt with throughout this process, and this is true, I think, of every museum gallery, is the issue of access and entrances. When they first designed this part of the museum, they had this vision of building this kind of three-dome structure, which you see in this watercolor, with two kind of smaller rotundas flanking this much larger central rotunda. So what was actually built is the portion on the right-hand side that you see there. They never completed this very grand central rotunda or the matching component on the left-hand side. Many other structures were added to the museum over time. So here in this photo up here, you can see the academic wing and other components that were built off on this side. But it never achieved kind of that original version. But what was created was a very complicated kind of nested structure that had entrances from various locations. It actually had one kind of hidden staircase that was very hard to find that took you into the lower halls. And so we've really looked at kind of access into this wing. One of the things that we've done is connect it with a redesigned main entrance for the Egyptian wing, as well as the museum as a whole. One of the things that happened was the moving of our colossal Sphinx of Ramses II from the lower hall to the main entrance, which you see here. It sits in what we call the Sphinx Gallery. This caused quite a lot of consternation amongst other departments in the museum about how much emphasis and dominance this particular Egyptian sculpture had at the entrance to a museum that covered many other cultures and parts of the world. There was a compromise. We had the Sphinx displayed here at the center, but you see these cases behind and this room behind there displaying other cultures around the world. So everyone was happy in the end, and we did have the Sphinx, of course, dominating the entrance to the museum, but also linking the broader, we have the Middle Eastern galleries off on the right-hand side, apart from Egypt, linking the Middle East galleries with the Egyptian wing, which is off to the entrance to which is off on the left-hand side there. There you just see the process of moving the Sphinx. And this is what we call the gateway to Egypt. It takes you in to now a sort of a unified series of spaces, the three levels of the Cox wing, elevator system, and a more attractive kind of way to enter the whole thing. So that was a major change. And one of the things, of course, that has been a focus for us is the goal of accommodating these very large, heavy architectural pieces as originally intended in the upper space with its 18-meter ceiling. And so our plan is to bring the large gateways, columns, etc., from the Palace of Merintah, install them in the upper hall, where they will reach the lower part of this series of clerestory windows that you see here, and really use that space to its original intent. So this is just a view into that planned space of the Upper Egyptian halls, which we'll look at in more detail. One of the things that we spent a lot of time looking at, of course, is the potentials and limitations of the architecture. We've become very familiar with Guastavino and his Catalan vault system. These are beautiful ceilings in many parts of the museum that he was involved in, like the one that you see there. But they are structures that we don't want to have any flex or cracking or change occurring through pressures on the system. So here you see some of the original plans of this. We've looked in detail. The structural engineers have examined the potentials of this building, and of course accommodating these massive gateways and doorways and elements upstairs is the goal of this. The solution has been to put in a number of major kind of supporting features. There are going to be these high tensile rods that will run through the lower, just below the upper Egyptian floor, the ceiling of the lower Egyptian hall, steel tie rods. This is the outer support structure for a series of rods that are going to run through the center, just below the vault ceiling. Oh, that's my alarm telling me to finish up quickly here. Which will also double very nicely. They'll have a sort of a double purpose as a mounting system for lighting for the displays below. In the Upper Egyptian Hall, we're currently installing the capability to mount the big columns and gateway elements of the Merintah Palace. You can see these large plates are being installed at floor level, actually slightly below floor level, spanning the steel floor joists. These will be covered again by the terrazzo floor, so you don't even see these things. And above this will be the display of the larger architectural pieces of the Merintah Palace. In a lot of the gallery, we're basically refurbishing the entire kind of physical structure of it. The windows are being treated, replaced. We have different types of windows for the different gallery spaces, depending on the different kind of conservation and light issues. Some of the galleries, we don't want to have any UV light or ambient light apart from the lighting itself. The central gallery you see the windows that will be installed there have different physical aspects to them. So climate control, new window systems to coordinate with the different gallery displays. And just very quickly here, everything that's going on in the public spaces on the main floor, the lower Egyptian hall, and then the upper hall is just part of the reinstallation project. So the Penn Museum's Egyptian and Nubian collections is about 52,000 objects. The goal of the public displays is to bring about 2,400, I think, is that the number, 2,400 objects into the permanent galleries. So the bulk of the collection, nearly 50,000 objects, will be actually below ground in the storerooms. And so coordinated with the public spaces, we are rebuilding our storerooms, which include a series of spaces dedicated to research and also teaching. So it's sort of a coordinated series of collection, storage, and use spaces, also tied with the museum's loading dock there. So you see that construction process all going on. So our collection, which is currently off-site, very unfortunately, will be coming back, the storage collection, around 2026 as well. So as all of this has been going on, just to complicate matters, as many of you are familiar with, when you take public galleries offline, the public outreach, education department, and the museum as a whole becomes very concerned about allowing people to see Egyptian material. The Egyptian collections in our museum are by far the biggest draw to the museum as a whole, I think, as some people alluded to earlier this morning in connection to the man as well. Many people want to see the material, so we have this very nice decoration on the new gateway to Egypt. The closed door gives you information where to find Egyptian material. Jennifer actually was the main curator for a temporary display, a temporary set of 3 galleries, actually, Ancient Egypt from discovery to display, which includes not just sort of traditional display areas like you see here, but an open storage area as well as at the back. It's only just recently closed, an open conservation space where the conservators interact with people as they've been involved in conserving a lot of the smaller pieces that are going into the galleries. So that has also been part of this long project. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the the projected work on the Cox wing. And I guess I will stop at that point and turn it over to Jen.
Joe, do you want to
to
take a
talk-
few
oh,
questions
yes,
about that specifically, or do you want to hold all the questions because all your talks are?
It's up to you.
Are there questions about the structural part of this, perhaps, or? Okay, then perhaps
Sure,
I'm
of
not
course,
seeing
yeah,
a bunch of hands.
as you-
Oh, Chris.
Question perhaps. You were showing dimensions in metric, but in Canada we had this problem on September 1st, 77, it became metric. Most of the structure are using imperial metric.
Yes, well, if you look closely at a lot of the detailed plans, you'll find both metric and imperial. Yes, we have the same problem in the United States. The United States briefly embraced metric and then backtracked. So,
Yeah.
yes. Not really. I mean, as archaeologists, of course, we always work in metric, but architects and builders in the United States work in English measures. So we usually just put both. And I think even our design firm, which is based in the UK, is Haley Sharp Design, is they just use both as well. So just an added step, I guess.
Isabel has a question.
Yes. Hi, Joseph. Thank you very much for your presentation. I also wanted to ask, the last slide that you've shown us, is that the storage area? Or is that, sorry, I really,
No,
I'm
this
not
one,
sure if I understood correctly. I'm not sure if that's the storage area with the curator.
this slide here is the storage area.
It's not projecting.
It's-
To,
The PowerPoint clicked off.
yeah, the final slide was the Ancient Egypt from Discovery to Display, the temporary gallery, which is currently open, as well as the visible storage and open conservation. There are three contiguous spaces. The open conservation space is only just closed. The conservators, we have a large team of conservators, especially concerned with the Marantaw Palace conservation work. They found themselves, I think, overburdened, overworked with the need to staff the open conservation lab. So all of the conservation spaces are now closed, and that's been repurposed. But the temporary gallery itself is still open.
It was quite interesting to see like everything on display and then like a screen and the curators on the other side, like they're open to
Yeah,
any kind of questions or
yeah, there was a window that visitors they were actively involved in conservation inside of that space. Visitors could stop and ask them questions. I think it was very successful. The public enjoyed it a lot. I think they had a schedule to specific schedule for different staff members to be involved in there. But I think they found it a little burdensome in the end when they had such a large schedule.
I'm sure from the public point of view, it must have been extremely interesting to have someone answer directly any kind of questions
extremely
that
popular
would come up.
part. But, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.